Yeah, no, it's good to just get in.
Hey, are we live? Hey,
It says so.
all of you out there in webinar land, please sign in that bar to the left. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and we'll start collecting your questions. I will prattle on here for a little bit to welcome you and tell you what we're going to do today. My name is John Granger, the Hogwarts professor. I'm coming to you live from Oklahoma City with maybe a 1 second delay, forgive me. And Beatrice Groves, Professor Beatrice Groves of Trinity College at Oxford University, is coming to us live from Greenwich time to answer your questions. Here we are. This is the Potter Pundit Sunday School. Sunday School. I hope not. The Potter Pundit Summer School live webinar Q&A. We've had 2 classes so far. I've given a lecture on literary alchemy and one on ring composition, because that was what the survey that I sent out to thousands of people said. More than 70% of people wanted to hear talks on those subjects. Tomorrow I'll talk about something brand new. I mean, I haven't talked about before. I'll be talking about embedded texts inside the books and why we have those things. So,
Hi, Suzanne. Suzanne has just joined us.
Is that one of your friends?
No, I don't know. No, she's just written. Hi, just made it. My name is Suzanne. So just saying hello.
Right. Suzanne, welcome. We're getting things here. My son is running the work. We got 9 people in the room, which is
Hi.
much more. Oh, sorry, we're tripling here. We're going up and up and up. I hope everybody who wanted to get in could get in. We had a little bit of a snafu this morning where the connecting URLs, the webinar jam thing rebooted on Tuesday, which we didn't learn about until Thursday, and all the URLs were changed. So anyway, if that's the worst problem we have, it's fine. Everybody, and I should welcome everybody, the hundreds of people that are in the summer school classroom. I want to welcome them because this is going to be recorded and sent out to them tomorrow. All right, enough prologue. Let's start off with a question from the classes. Okay. What do you think her inspiration was for writing literary alchemy? Elizabethan playwrights, metaphysical poets, or a more contemporary author? Yeah, that is a great question because we don't have any idea. So we have a wide open field for speculation. I consider myself an expert in the field of literary alchemy, J.K. Rowling subsection division. I'm going to defer to somebody who actually has some academic certification in the fields of medieval and Renaissance literature, and who happens to have read all the books I think that J.K. Rowling has read. B, what do you think?
Well, the only evidence we've got of her reading Elizabethan poetry directly is the quote where she says in one of her interviews, "I wish I was the kind of person who wandered out into my garden clutching a slim volume of Elizabethan poetry, but I'm not." As John and I have been discussing, she's keen on narrative misdirection in her interviews, so she could mean she reads Elizabethan poetry but not in her garden. That would still be technically true. I haven't seen any evidence in her writing of connections with Donne, for example, would be the sort of obvious, most alchemical writer. So it could be from there, and I'm sure she's read Donne's songs and sonnets, but we just don't have any direct evidence of that.
Well, for me, the obvious answer when you're talking literary alchemy is Shakespeare.
Yes.
That Shakespeare, the reason that this stream exists in English literature is because of the behemoth place that Shakespeare has in the tradition. I don't think. Well, maybe Donne and metaphysical poets, they would have come up with it on their own. But other than them, I think it rises again in the 19th century with Blake and Coleridge, who are very much involved with the Shakespearean restoration at the same time period. So if I had to say one and bet the farm on it, I would say Shakespeare.
Mm.
But my bet is that it's more contemporary. I mean, you were talking about Elizabeth Goudge.
We were just talking about Elizabeth Goudge, and I think, you know, she doesn't need to get it from anywhere else necessarily. So certainly the sun and moon imagery is so strong in Little White Horse. We were just talking about how when Luna goes to Bill and Fleur's wedding, she wears this bright yellow sun color, and that coming together at a wedding of the sun and the moon is very much sort of absolutely central to Goudge's story in Little White Horse. And I thought, oh, that's a little Goudge moment there. Lisa has just written and said, checking to see whether I've signed in correctly. And you have, Lisa. We can see your writing. So do ask a question if you want to.
Okay. One other person I would think of that's not often discussed, even in books about literary alchemy, oddly enough, is Angela Carter. You know, she wrote a book which is entirely, every chapter is a different stage in the 7 or 9 stage. And we haven't got any evidence that Rowling reads Carter, but it's certainly a woman writer of.
It's very plausible that she read Carter. I mean, you know, when I'm interviewing A-level students applying to Oxford, they've all read Angela Carter. So she's very much popular with English teenagers. So I would think it likely.
I mean, I had never heard of Angela Carter, I confess, until I was in the UK at my first trip to Swansea in Wales. And one of the women advisors that I have had written her PhD thesis on Angela Carter. And I was embarrassed to have to say, huh? Yeah, but she said, "Oh, John, you have to read Angela Carter because she's alchemical," and there it was. So that's 2 answers to that. Have we got any questions in our board? Do we go to our list here?
Stick with the list for the moment.
Stick with the list. All right, let's go with the one. The big. We got this in several different expressions. What key ingredient makes the Harry Potter series resonate so strongly with so many people? Why do I continuously reread the books? You know, when's Pottermania? Go ahead, B.
So, simple question. For me, it's primarily about the mixing of genres. So I think that she takes this sort of, as it were, English school child reading, Roald Dahl, Enid Blyton, the West Witch series, these things that key into universal experience of being at school and the way in which, you know, the timetable of her books follows something we can all recognize and all feel, and then brings onto that this mythic structure and this sort of deaths of loved people and just the sheer size of it. So the complexity that can happen over 7 stories that interrelate, which no one else had really done before. So if you have something like Tolkien, which is huge and mythic, there's no humor in it at all. And I'm sure there's some Tolkien fans would say, yeah, there's some, obviously there's Second Breakfast and things, but compared to Rowling, it's not, funny is not what it's about. And maybe familiar is not what it's about either. And so I think she takes the funny and the familiar and then links it with these huge themes that have been popular, for literature throughout time. These, how do we deal with death? And
I like that answer. And I'm gonna step on your shoulders here, just dig it to the next step. Northrop Frye in Anatomy of Criticism talks about the spectrum of realism and mythic, and in the middle you get romance, and that it has to be realistic enough that you can get over to the archetypal and deliver the goods. Rowling makes this magical world very credible, largely because of the humor. It's engaging. You're caught up in Harry's Bildungsroman. You're sucked in by the postmodern themes, and then she delivers, these archetypal, this heavyweight. And it may be, despite herself, we were talking about this earlier, that she's writing parody of Schoolboy. It's not really Enid Blyton. It's Enid Blyton, in Mad Magazine or in Punch. It's Molesworth. It's not Tom Brown. And that kind of mockery which is fun. She still winds up delivering a paragon of the genre. You get her twisted version of it, so it's not empire values, it's postmodern values, but you still get a powerful experience of it through that genre. And she does the same thing with Christianity. She delivers kind of a comic Narnia where here's a unicorn, there's a phoenix, a flying griffin. Yeah, it's the entire Christian menagerie. And I think you're supposed to sort of chuckle, there's another one. And yet those symbols still have the power that they have, and people are engaged by them, especially, you mentioned death. You know, Harry dies in every book, and he rises from the dead in the presence of a symbol of Christ. And the dead don't leave us. It's a very hopeful message about death, not one of, there goes a nut, Sirius Black is dead, we're never going to see him again. There's always this message that the dead will come back, in Russian, the Posturanos. There's this otherworldliness that makes us hopeful. I mean, like Luna. Luna's, you were saying that
I think Luna is meant to guide us towards our attitude to death in the series. I think she's definitely meant to be the right, however crazy she might have been about Gertie Roots up to this point, that she's meant to be right about death. And I think the subtlety that we didn't know she had a dead parent till quite late. Obviously we meet her late, but that sort of sense that Harry's suffering is mirrored by someone else who has a much more hopeful response to it.
Totally agreed. Any questions in the board yet?
No, I'll tell you what, John, I can see it clearly. So if I see a question, I'll let you know.
All right, good. Okay. What is something typically gleaned on the second or third reading that readers often miss the first time? And what are some lesser known interesting facts on Harry Potter?
Okay, so look, quite a few of those. Starting with the rereading one, something I really like that Rowling does is to give literal examples of things that have a sort of, as it were, a plot function. So the obvious thing here I was thinking of is Cho and Ginny, where, which one is Harry going to end up with? And so when Cho and Ginny play each other at Quidditch, Ginny beats Cho to the snitch. And you're like, oh, okay, so Harry's not the seeker, he's the snitch in this particular case. But and exactly the same thing happens when they're naming the DA. So it's Cho who comes up with the idea of DA. She says, let's call it the DA, let's call it the Defense Association. And Ginny says, oh yeah, DA is good, but let's stand it for Dumbledore's Army. So like Ginny takes Cho's idea and then makes it the correct thing. And I think you're meant to think, oh yeah, so Cho's the sort of starter for Harry, but Ginny's where it's going to end, And she does that quite a lot. A friend was pointing out to me that when there's a moment when they're in Charms, when they're lifting up cushions and throwing them into the pot, and they're discussing why things might be happening in the plot, is Snape doing something, or is it Mad Eye who's doing something? And when they make a correct guess, the cushion goes into the pot, and when they make a bad guess, it goes out the window. And it gives a little hint of what's going on. So I think it's very clever for that. I was noticing the other day, just because I was thinking about the way in which Rowling uses Jane Austen, that little moment of some old witch in Bath who has a book that you can't put down. You have to just wander around doing everything one-handed. And I'd been to Bath recently, and they make a big thing in Bath of Austen is Bath's most famous resident. That's her sort of name in Bath, is Bath's most famous resident. And I thought, it's kind of perhaps not chance that the person who Rowling thinks is the most readable author, the one person you can't put down, is from Bath. So I kind of imagine Rowling wandering around with a copy of Emma doing stuff one-handed.
Let's say that she reads her books that she loves serially. She reads them again and again and again.
She said she's read Emma over 20 times and that she reads them on loop. So when she's finished, she starts again. Yeah.
She actually read it 20 times before she started writing Harry Potter. So she had to get that voice down, I think. For me, I went in a different direction on this question, B, which is nice. We're doing something different. To me, the things that people miss is the profound stuff. That we're trained so much to read at the narrative level, the surface level, and and maybe the moral level, we get the political content, we get, the Nazis are bad and the Rainbow Coalition and Devil's Army is good. But when we go beneath that and we start, the allegorical or the anagogical or the sublime, that stuff we experience, I think, is a large part of why we enjoy the story so much, but it doesn't percolate up into the conscious mind. And so, I talk to people about the eyes of Deathly Hallows. There are 5 different, sets of floating eyeballs inside that book. And people will look at me and do really? There's 5?
Yeah,
eyeballs?
I don't remember those. Yeah.
Okay, it's eyes are clearly something. It's about a transformed vision. How you can really see things correctly is a big part of the book. And yet we're kind of insensitive to the symbols that are not, very much in your face, like the unicorn bleeding in the forest. Yeah.
And I think that was lovely when Rowling said, that the practical reason for Harry wearing glasses is that she wanted a glasses-wearing hero when she was a child. But the other reason was that he's the eye on the books, she said. That was her phrase, so that he's the way you look at the story. And I thought that's really nice, because those glasses are not a symbol in the sense that they don't jump out at you in the way a unicorn does and go, this is symbolic. You just think he's a guy wearing glasses, and this is really great for children who wear glasses throughout the world. But that there's a symbol, there's a symbolic aspect to it you might not have spotted. And when she said that, I thought, oh yeah, and Hermione mends his glasses, or she helps him see through them when they get all wet in the Quidditch game. I thought, yes, and Hermione is the person who helps Harry understand what's going on, so that works very nicely that she sorts out.
2 things on that now, because Suzanne's written us a question here. We're going to get into that. One, his glasses are round, and Dumbledore's are half moon shaped, and I think that's, again, that largely this solar and lunar idea, as well as just. I'm looking at the question from Suzanne here. This is great.
So why has Christian symbolic literature, why is it out of favor? Why has it gone out of favor? That's Suzanne's question.
So it's more of a philosophical question. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm going to continue talking and let Bea think about that question. Give her some time here. Back to the glasses. Harry being the eye on the story. I think you're meant to see when Harry is struggling to understand what's going on. Usually with the text, everything from the chocolate frog card to his understanding of the tale of the 3 brothers, that he is doing inside the book what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah, we're looking through his eyes, sort of. It's not first-person narration, but we're right over his shoulder. And those glasses are, our corrected vision. We're trying to see the story opaquely through the stories that are embedded inside the story. We'll talk about this on Friday in the 3rd class. But there's a lot of embedded text inside there. Rowling seems to be writing about stories. All right. Yeah. Bea, have you had enough time to think about Christian symbolism?
Well, yeah, I don't have an answer, obviously, Susanna, I'm afraid. I think, obviously, straight out didactic literature is out of fashion. So things that look like they might be telling you what you ought to be thinking or believing, we don't like that anymore in a way that we did. And I think one of the successes of Harry Potter is that it is Christian symbolic literature in many ways. And I've written on John's blog recently about the harrowing of hell within Harry Potter. And I don't think, we were talking about, people don't get the profound stuff immediately. That doesn't seem to have been spotted by other people, that there are these harrowings within it. And so she slips it under the radar. If people having, been reading them carefully for 20 years, they don't see it, then it's very subtle. And I think that has...
Let me jump in here, Bea, and say, a plug for your book, because you're not going to do that. Professor Groves has just published a book, or Routledge has just published her book, Literary Illusion and Harry Potter, in which, really, it has about 7 or 8 different reasons that justify the cost of the book in themselves. One of them certainly is the chapter 4, I think it is, on the Christian content inside the series. Now, I was that guy for a long time, and I'm very happy to pass that mantle on to Professor Groves as the expert on Christian things inside Harry Potter. But what she says is certainly true here, in that her description of her exegesis, really, of the books as a parallel text of the beguiled idea of Christ's incarnation and deception of Satan is over the top brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, seriously, it's someone like myself that thought that I'd gone through the book fairly carefully a few times with the Christian symbolism comb. I missed that. So on the one hand, I was very excited reading the chapter. On the other hand, I was ashamed. Oh my gosh, how did I miss that? How did I miss that? If I have to answer the question about why is Christian symbolism gone out of favor, is to say that it hasn't. It hasn't. It just takes a very deft hand. I mean, Twain talks about, if you want to teach somebody something, it can't be overt, right? It has to be covert. And Christian symbolism, and this is true even of medieval and Renaissance literature, it wasn't done in a didactic, evangelical, witnessing way. I mean, you read Spencer, and if you're not really sensitive to it, you don't experience that as an altar call. I mean, you experience that as something profound, and then you can get into it, more deeply if you want to. The reason that Christian symbolism has gone out of favor is writers are not so familiar with that covert and sensitive uses of it. And readers have largely lost their sensitivity to it all. They experience these things when it's done correctly. Witness the popularity of The Lord of the Rings, the Narnia, Harry Potter, or even the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games, Christian symbolism, her use of the pearl and the alchemical sequences and the soul triptych, it works, and it's traditional Christian stuff. It hasn't gone out of favor, but the skills on the writer's part and the skills on the reader's parts, they've largely eclipsed.
So Robert has responded that I think the privileged status of Christianity in Western culture makes Christian symbols suspect. And Suzanne has said, but so many people misunderstood her books. Is that good or bad, do you think? Which is interesting one. I think she definitely wanted people to misunderstand them before 7. So she's very keen that the dying and resurrecting hero wouldn't be spotted. And so I think that was intentional in her part, not to play up basically the Christian right. She hated their response, but I think it helped her hide. She could just keep saying, I'm not like this. And people would think, oh, she's not a Christian. It's not going to have Christian symbolism in it, and not spot what's going on. Good or bad is difficult. I don't know. I think it's bad that people think that they're obviously they need to be burnt. That's obviously a bad response. But that you might get it without feeling that you had to get it is good, I think. So when I read Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe as a child, I was really offended by how obvious the Christian symbolism was. And I think that wouldn't happen to people reading Harry Potter, that it's much, much more subtle. And that can work much better as a reader, I think. So I feel it's good, probably, Suzanne.
Well, I think it's good because if there weren't this confusion, I wouldn't have written one of my books. I mean,
there's nothing to do.
It gave us a great subject to say, wait a minute, without a Christian cosmology, magic doesn't work. If speech isn't causing things to come into existence, you can't use spells that are speech. But that's kind of a snarky answer. Forgive me. I think that the person who said Christianity has lost its privileged place. Certainly we live in a post-Christian age. I think most Christians today are really worshipers of the God of liberty more than they are of the God of Holy Trinity. And that loss of Christian culture and familiarity with these symbols, I think, as the writer has said here, it means that we're suspect about these things. We don't want to be preached at. We don't want that. I think Lewis talked about the stained glass window effect. You don't want that kind of, that's not enjoyable in story. But we also have just the fact that people don't get it consciously. It's totally off their screen. It's not something we cover in schools. I mean, you're privileged because you studied medieval and Renaissance literature when Christianity was the heart and soul of the predominant culture, and so it shows in all the literature. If you're not conversant in everything Christian, really, it's like studying Tibetan literature and not understanding Buddhism. But it's nowadays not so much. Not so much.
I just wanted to give you an example of how even in medieval times they could write things that were not didactic in their symbolism. There's a wonderful mystery play called it's traditionally called the Wakefield Second Shepherd's Play, in which there's a sort of comic character who steals a lamb, and then when the wise men come by mistake to his place, it's very Life of Brian actually. They come, then they wrap up the lamb and say it's a baby, and they worship the lamb as the baby, and then they realize that it's wrong, and he gets in trouble. And you think, there's a lamb pretending to be a baby here. How much more kind of Christian symbolism can you get? So Mac, who's the evil guy who's stolen the lamb, doesn't realize that what he's doing is creating a perfect Eucharistic symbol of the lamb who is a baby. And it's, just think, you don't expect that from medieval literature, to have that sense of a symbol. It doesn't spell out to you at any point that actually the fake baby that the wise men have been worshipping is kind of the true baby. But it's there in this sort of comic symbolism, which I think is quite surprising to people that's, that old.
There's certainly a contemporary chronological snobbery. The idea that the first people to be aware of genre and aware of the kind of story that they're telling only exists today, when really metafiction is as old as fiction. Certainly in Shakespeare.
My favorite metafiction thing is the earliest secular play we have, which is called The Marriage of Wit and Wisdom. I think it's 1453, something like that. There's a characters called 1 and 2, and they're watching a play, and one of them says, I think she should marry, this person. And the other one says, I think she should marry the other one. So they enter the play to try and make the plot happen the way they want it to happen. And you're like, what is modernity doing? It's already done.
Okay. This I have to look up. All right, but here we go. The question from a reader. What moment, passage, or part of the series gets you every single time? What impacts you the most, even after being steeped in the works for so long? I know this one for me.
Okay, well, I don't have a very profound answer for the first one. I always love the bit where Harry takes the Felix Felicis. When everything suddenly goes right for him. And I find that so pleasurable, because it's just like, this is how fiction and magic and things, you might expect them to work, that you could just make everything go right for your hero. And it never does the rest of the time. And then there's one moment, just everything he wants happens. And I find it very satisfying.
You have your wish fulfillment moment inside the books.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, and you can't let it last too long. And it's good when it wears off at the end, because otherwise it wouldn't carry on having any tension within it. But it's very nice for that little moment.
For me, and I've said this before, for me, it's always when Ron comes into the tent after the first Triwizard task and says, someone's trying to kill you, Harry. Everything snaps back into place. Everything that's been broken is healed. Hermione does what I do. It's a Granger thing. I bawl openly that way. And speaking of bawling openly, there's always the death of Dobby. I mean, I know Travis Prinzi talks about, one of the more profound Potter pundits. He was out cutting his lawn in Rochester, New York, and he was listening to the Stephen Fry version of Deathly Hallows, and they get to the death of Dobby, and he's cutting the lawn and sobbing. And his neighbors are like, oh, what's happened at the Prinzi house? The poor guy, he's cutting his lawn, but it's a bad day. He's weeping.
Dobby dies with the words Harry Potter on his lips. Those are his final words. And that's what Enobarbus does in Antony and Cleopatra. So Cleopatra claims that she dies with the word, when she does a fake death, she claims she dies with the word Antony. She says, tell him that Antony was the last word I spoke, and it's not true. But Enobarbus really does die with Antony as his final word, which is, I find Enobarbus' death is one of the most moving moments in literature for me. And Dobby, I think, is absolutely taking in that little sense of the power of that moment.
Phew. Okay. Uh, do we have it? Oh, we got a question here.
Kim
Question.
says,
Kim. What does Kim say?
so Kim says some of the brilliance of her Christian symbols are that they're universal symbols in many religions or esoteric knowledge for Christianity. So I think, yeah, absolutely. That's obviously one of the reasons that Christian symbols can work so well is that they tie into other times and places, that these are universal ideas.
I'm sorry.
No, go for it. You go.
This is a real problem with, both Christian fundamentalism and the reaction to Christian hegemony, is that we forget that Christianity, for the much greater part of its life, wasn't understood as a sectarian or a denominational thing, but as a human thing. And so these symbols, like the phoenix, you're going to find the phoenix in every culture, or the cross. The cross is a universal thing. Rene Guénon, a Muslim, says that that Islam has the theology of the cross, but Christianity's have the historical figure. I mean, it's not meant to be a sectarian, denominational thing. It's meant to be a human thing. Rowling's use of those symbols is certainly not because she has an evangelical message, that she's not trying to call people into the church and accept Christ as their personal savior. I mean, far from it. I mean, I think she says what you said. I mean, when she read the Narnia the second time, she was rather offended by the fact that what she thought was subtle was not very subtle at all. But she uses these genres from an older English tradition. If you use schoolboy novels, if you use Gothic literature as a model, if you use literary alchemy and Christian fantasy, those are Christian genres. You can't even parody those genres without having them suffused with Christian content. So whatever Rowling's intention, she delivers this kind of mythic religious experience to a secular culture, which Eliade says is why they're reading in the first place. And it's certainly not that she's saying, she's not waving the St. George's flag for Christianity. She's delivering a human experience using the predominant tools from her tradition, which is a Christian tradition.
I was thinking that with the wand law, which we've had on Pottermore, sort of this very clear, each wood, extraordinary depth of that. But the obvious one is the holly wand that Harry has, and of course that that hymn, the holly and the ivy. So the holly is green at wintertime, and therefore it's a Christian symbol. And it obviously says it's got spiky leaves and drops of blood as well. But that sense that things that are green in winter will always have had a special sense. We don't know whether they're really a pagan thing or not, but one can sense that that'll predate Christianity, as a sense of the sort of power of something that's green when everything else is dead. And it's become a Christian, holly's become a Christian symbol, but it's not only that. Right, we have another question from Jim. Based on the literary alchemy and the triptych of Harry, Hermione, Ron, with the appropriate pairing of Ron and Hermione, what do you think of J.K.R's later regret about not pairing Harry and Hermione?
That's a great question. I just read yesterday what she said exactly was that it was not a literary thing that she had them together, but just her stubbornness in keeping to her original story.
And she said, personal wish fulfillment, didn't she, of Ron thing? But so John and I are sort of going to come out here. This is a much wider question here about how much power an author has over their text once it's complete. And the fact is that Rowling is now the most interesting reader of her works, but she doesn't get to change what the text says. The text has its own, purity and wholeness, and it doesn't matter what she says about it now, except that it's really interesting to us, but it doesn't change it. So whatever reason she might have for saying that, and one might be suspicious that it was something that, it was an interview with Emma Watson, wasn't it? Emma Watson might want to hear that Hermione had a sort of cooler, more central role. You could see that could work, and it could also just ignite, made front page news around the world. The temptation to say something like that gets that kind of response must be huge. And she could see that Ron and Hermione might have issues. And she says, I think they might need to go to therapy, but I think they'll work it out. It'll be okay. So
I mean, that they represent a quarreling couple. It's going to be a pretty rocky relationship. If they're alchemical, Mercury and Sulfur, as their names very pointedly say that they are, and their entire dynamic inside the books show they have this alchemical function. For Rowling to say that wasn't a literary thing is out of this world bizarre. It's
and it's based, as I've talked about myself, that these quarreling couples have big, it's obviously Beatrice and Benedict in Shakespeare are the sort of primary one, and then Austen also borrows from that in Emma and Mr. Knightley, and obviously in Pride and Prejudice as well. So this is a very strong literary tradition that Rowling's absolutely keying into. And when they first met on the Hogwarts Express, I thought those two are ending up together. You can just see they're fighting off each other, paying attention to each other. They're upset about each other's response. This is clearly where it's going. And I had a friend who's a monk, and he said to me, no, I didn't see that at all. And I thought, yes, because, erotic energy is not really your thing. So you're not going to spot it yet. And obviously children don't spot it either. But it was clearly set up from that moment through. And I think she's as you say, it clearly is a literary thing. It wasn't just wish fulfillment about her own relationships that she put it in.
And Bea pointed out something that, she didn't use the technical words, but, in Latin it's intentio operis versus intentio auctoris, that these two have traditionally been understood as being different things. Like the man who wrote Pinocchio was a ardent Italian communist, all right? But he writes a book, a fairy tale, really, that is so clearly Christian in terms of its resurrectional themes and redemption and all. You can't even get past the Noah imagery. So you look at it, you think, wow, his intention was to write a secular tale, and it just absolutely got away from him. I don't think that Rowling's original intentions were anything but literary. And I think they were specifically about reading and writing and creating this kind of effect and making us kind of giggle about them. And her comments now, as Bea said, are fun to look at, but they're always one of these things you just want to shake your head. That horse has left the barn. Your ability to tell us, what this story is about is gone. We got a new question.
Lisa, do you think that the chance Narcissa took with her lie to Voldemort in Deathly Hallows can be compared with the Lily's sacrifice that we learn about at the beginning of the series, and can be considered a sacrifice in and of itself, thereby completing another ring cycle? So to me, yes, definitely. And again, Rowling has said that that the mother's love has saved Harry at the beginning of the series, and it saves him again at the end. I think it's also really important that we've always, the Malfoy relationship is a really interesting one, that family has always been really close. They're the baddies, but they clearly have a very intense love of each other that is, when we see it in the Potter family, is an entirely positive thing. And I think it was a really important part of bringing Slytherin back into the fold in the end, to have Narcissa being the crucial thing. If she'd said, oh, actually, he's still alive, someone needs to kill him now, it wouldn't have worked at this point. So that it is crucial. And we see that in the Spinner's End chapter as well, don't we? And that she's risking Voldemort's wrath to ask Snape to save her son. So we get it already told us that she's willing to risk her life in order to save Malfoy, just as Lily is to save her son. I don't think Narcissa cares about Harry, but the side of that is that Harry's life is saved.
I can only just say that Rowling has told us flat out that's the case. She's given us several other pointers. She said that the death of Tonks and Lupin was pretty much required by the structure of the work, meaning that she has to have a philosophical orphan at the end of the books to tie it up with Harry's opening thing in Philosopher's Stone. Those comments show that, that she's very, and the fact that there are, 37 echoes of Philosopher's Stone inside Deathly Hallows. She's really tying the latch on the ring very tight. We got a question from Robert?
Yeah, so my gaydar went off several times with Dumbledore, especially in the opening of Half-Blood Prince. Is Albus a hermaphroditic figure, combining the male and the female in a two-spirited way? Okay, I'm not going to go for the hermaphrodite side, so that's yours, John. I think, when she comes out and says that he's gay, then obviously, as we were saying, that's an authorial reading. We don't have to say that's what the text says. To me, it made a lot of sense of why he goes off the rails.
Why he goes off the rails?
In that sense, without him falling in love with Grindelwald when they're teenagers, what is he doing? Accepting Grindelwald's view of things. So when you read it and you think, oh, it's a close friendship, you think, how does he lose his moral compass so fully here? But if you think, oh, he's fallen in love for the first time, then you think, yeah, you do often lose your moral compass when sex enters your life for the first time. So I think that makes sense within the story, and you don't need the authorial voice to say that. But equally, obviously, it's still open to you to reject that reading.
Okay. I'm not interrupting. Okay, go ahead. Two
go ahead.
Two friends at the open book tour reading at Carnegie Hall, in which she said, "I've always thought of Dumbledore as gay." Catherine McDaniel, the host of Reading, Writing, Rolling, and Amy Sturgis, both really profound Potter pundits. And my conversations with them that week made me think that, of course you would think of Dumbledore as gay in a way. I mean, he has resolved contraries. There's several products to the alchemical process, most notably the Philosopher's Stone, with the elixir of life and this kind of thing. But also there's the rebus, which is the hermaphrodite, this resolution of contraries. So an alchemist, in a way, when done with the process, in a way, is sexually transcendent, not neutral, but really beyond this kind of thing. When I found out that she thought of him as gay, I thought, well, of course she would. I mean, how is a man who's sexually transcendent, how is he experienced in the world today? People will say he's gay because he's not really attracted to women.
Well, and also he's been burnt with his Grindelwald, and so she says, from then on, that's it. He doesn't fall in love with anyone again. He doesn't have sex, So it's not just that he's gay; it's that he's a gay man who is entirely unwilling to go down that path, as it were.
But the other rebus inside the story is Rubius Haggard. His name not only means red, but it suggests this rebus quality. Here's this giant, half-giant, bearded man who wears an apron. He likes to knit, and he's mommy to the most dangerous magical creatures. I mean, he's a hermaphroditic figure, and he's really Dumbledore's doppelganger in a way. His inner person. He often talks to him and says, "If I acted like this, then this would happen." Yeah. That kind of response, that kind of mirror imaging, I think that he's really a rebus that has just decided that this is not for him. We have another question?
We do, yes. So Robert says, but won't her opinion become canon with Fantastic Beasts 2? And so this, to me, as a literary scholar, this is the difference between fandom canon and literary canon. So the text is not related to what the author later writes. So the text for Harry Potter is the 7 Harry Potter novels, and they are not affected by other things that Rowling writes. So that will become canon in fandom, because canon in fandom means anything that Rowling says or writes. But in a literary sense, it's not canon. It's so to give another example, Shakespeare writes Henry IV Part 1 and 2, and we have the character of Falstaff in those 2 plays, and they're linked plays. And Falstaff goes through them. Falstaff appears to become a popular character, and he then writes Merry Wives of Windsor, which also has Falstaff in it. But this is not Falstaff as he is in Henry IV, who is, a profound literary character, one of the greatest ever literary characters, and he's just not that anymore in Merry Wives. So Merry Wives is like Shakespeare's Fantastic Beasts in this context. It doesn't affect how we read Falstaff in Henry IV. So that would be my view.
This is a great question, Robert, because it also highlights Rowling's relationships with people that tell her stories or adapt her stories. I mean, I think she came into Fantastic Beasts, the film, because she wanted to have some control over what happened to this book because Warner Brothers is going to make a travel log of some kind. And what she's found out is that her screenplay is not the final product. And they cut 15 different scenes, as we've detailed with Harvard's professor, out of this thing. She called it an excruciating experience in the play. And if you look at what's being done with Strike and what's done with Casual Vacancy, she has her own film company, Brought Studios. She's an executive producer. And while somebody else will write the adaptation, she's on set, according to the actors, doing line changes day to day in the filming. I think you could argue that what we learned from Strike, the screenplay in the BBC production, may actually tell us something that we missed inside the books. Not so much anything that we learn about Fantastic Beasts. For example, we were talking about the gay character, and this Credence is suggestive. It's suggested that the magic that he experiences is his sexuality and it's repressed. He's a closeted person. Warner Brothers cut him out at the finish. I mean, he comes back to life and is getting on the boat. Warner Brothers cut him out, I think, because they were afraid that people in Peoria it wasn't going to sell, and so we don't get that. We don't know what the story is as written, so we can't really accept anything inside the screenplays as being rolling or as commentary on the books.
Yeah. Lana's asked the question just following on from that. So does a development in the Fantastic Beasts series become Harry Potter question? Sorry, Harry Potter canon. And as I say, I just don't think it does. So that's sort of...
This is... and people in fandom have very ardent positions on this, and there are Potter pundits that disagree. I know that Amy Sturgis has a much broader idea of canon than I do. To me, canon is the books, and I like to use the interviews as gloss and suggestions.
Yeah.
Sometimes I look at the interviews and think of them the way that Faulkner scholars look at what Faulkner did later in his life, but he obviously couldn't remember what he was talking about, what he had read. And so they discount his opinions about what he had said.
Another good literary example is Wordsworth. Wordsworth rewrites the Prelude. So he's rewriting and so now we consider we have a two-text Prelude, and critics say, we think the 1805 version is the proper one, and the one that Wordsworth thinks the proper one is the 1850 because that's the one he rewrote, but no one else agrees with him. So you think if we can do that when someone's rewriting, the text itself. So, so if Rowling were now to rewrite bits of Harry Potter and let's say, team up Hermione with Harry, it still wouldn't be Harry Potter. It's still not canon. Lisa, we have some praise for you here from Lisa. John's article about Fantastic Beasts and the Lego movie version is fascinating. So not a question, but just more of those. Yeah.
I've had to do a lot of work to try to recreate the original screenplay. I mean, the shooting script, but it's basically a speculative crapshoot. At least we can know that the movie that we have is not the screenplay that was approved for shooting and they actually shot. So
did she not keep rights over the final thing, or we just don't know?
No, they own the rights to Fantastic Beasts, and
right. So they didn't have to use her at all.
And, David Yamin and David Yates, they think that she's working for them, and she clearly thought that that they were working for her. And
that could be an awkward relationship. Yeah, I can see that.
They talk about her in the most patronizing way, like, "Oh yeah, she thought this was going to happen, and we had to fix it up."
We had to tell her no. Yeah, awkward.
Here we go. We get some more questions here. All right, let's go. This one we got two. This is the big one, right? Okay, and we got two different versions of it. My question is, how does one learn to read like a Potter pundit? This is from Robert in Dallas. How do we develop our skill at reading and thinking deeply about books? Are there books that might help or strategies that might point in the right direction? I've been thinking about, does it begin with love for a particular book and then a process of rereading? I've been thinking about the quote by Nicholas Gomez de Villa, in which he says, "How to read is the last thing one learns."
That's nice.
B.
So, the unsubtle answer is just to read a lot, and you just keep reading different types of things. And I love working with illusion. I love working with how books sort of are talking to each other. And obviously, the more you read, the easier that becomes. I think also if you read a lot of things, it helps you stand back from them slightly and see, genre patterns, for example. And once you've got into that habit of thinking, I suppose what's a writer got to do? How do they draw you in? How do they bring people into the narrative? How do they make them leave the narrative? That kind of thing. You're thinking of it in a slightly more structural way. That helps. I think you can definitely read that way and sort of immersively at the same time. Maybe the second reading, you can kind of think about it more structurally like that. I also think simply really good literary critics help give a path to it. So I think one of the best literary critics is Christopher Ricks. And you don't need to buy the book. You can just go and get it from a library. And you see someone like Ricks playing with texts, then it really gives you a sort of sense of what can be done. This is not at all Harry Pottery, but there's a good book by John Lennard called The Poetry Handbook, which takes you through each aspect of a poem. So like there's a chapter on form and a chapter on rhyme, and a chapter on structure and that kind of thing. And I think that's really helpful for reading poetry, just to get a sense of what you can do with each of those kinds of things. Lana Whitehead, sorry, Lana, that's not how I pronounce your name. Sorry. Lots of reading is important. Think of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule. But good teachers and other skilled guides are also important, as are Potter pundits, providing opportunities like this. One thing I love about the Harry Potter phenomenon is that the average person seems more inclined to do what we're doing. Yes, so something that joins you in. And I think the sense that lots of other people are reading, and this is why book clubs are getting, work, that it's fun to be able to discuss it with someone else. And I think you can also look on the internet. I was doing this. I was reading a novel the other day when I ended in this odd way, and I thought, wonder if they're trying to say that. And I thought, I wonder what other people say. And of course, these days you can now go on the internet and find out what other people are saying about it. And obviously, Harry Potter is the biggest example of that.
But it's funny that Lana Whitehead is joining us. Hi, Lana. She's one of the more profound Potter pundits in the world. So it's delight and flattering to have you here with us. I would only say what you both have already said is that in addition to reading broadly, when you reread, it's more a function of rereading than it is even reading broadly. Because reading broadly today, when we're getting thousands of books every day, especially on electronic versions, it's very difficult. Especially if you start late, people are frustrated. One of the alternative versions of this question came from Emma in Sydney, Australia, where she said, "How do we do this if we have a real life? How do we do that?" Well, two things. One is reread, and as you say, as you reread, then you begin to think about how it was done, and that doesn't lessen your enjoyment. It really, in a way, it increases your appreciation of the artistry of the story. I'm still drawn into the story every time I reread, even when I'm looking for structure. The next thing is to find help and a community to talk to. And that's really what we're doing here at Potter Pundits. I mean, it's unabashed plug here for what we're doing, is find an expert that's done the work, done their homework, done their research, and buy a book like Literary Illusion and Harry Potter. And this is the first time I talked about this, but I'm going to make an offer at the end of the summer school in which I'll be offering a 7-week class in which we will do. Week by week, I will be talking about, structure, symbolism, genre, parody, and how to get at that inside Harry Potter and what it means. That type of program, and now we're demonstrating that we can do it here. It used to be that you had to go back to school, you had to do it with a book without the ability to talk to the author, you had to go to a conference and get hit with grape shot of all these different perspectives and still have no take away from it. Now we have the technology and we have a community where we can actually do this kind of thing. And God willing, beginning next week or the week after, we'll have a program, Dumbledore's Academy, whatever you want to call it, in which we can do that. We can do that.
I like what you did there.
You got another question from Jim?
Question from Jim. You've both been marvellous in linking Harry Potter to its literary ancestors. What current works are worthy successors? Alchemy, Chiasmus, Deep Symbols, etc. Thanks for sharing your insights. So, John, you working more on, you've followed this through to other people, haven't you?
Yeah. I have to remember that Beatrice is a research fellow and lecturer in Renaissance and medieval and Renaissance literature. So
Renaissance, yeah.
The only weakness in literary illusion in Harry Potter is there's no Colette, there's no C.S. Lewis. Oh, you refer to Lewis several times, but there's no Nabokov, and that's really that's the killer for me. Was we didn't get the 20th century crowd. But to Jim's question here, really, I think the best work that exists really in the shadow of Harry Potter, that in a way is as good as Harry Potter, are the Suzanne Collins books. First, there's the Gregor novels, which were only exist because Scholastic was looking for another Harry Potter. Gregor the Overlander are written as rings. There's pearl imagery. But they couldn't become very popular on one account because they're underground in the dark, and they feature giant rats and bats and crazy things like that aren't going to show up well on film. But then Suzanne Collins takes the formula that she's really, in a way, she reverse engineers Harry Potter in the Gregor books, and then she shifts to a different genre, not a boy hero again, but she invents Katniss Everdeen, Peeta Mellark, and Gale, and that triptych inside the dystopia of Hunger Games is a political commentary, which is much more profound than Harry Potter, much more challenging, certainly for left and right. And the alchemical work that she does inside each one of the games is so covert and yet so powerful nonetheless. It speaks to her real mastery of tools that I'm pretty sure she pulled right out of Rowling's toolbox. There are things like the Twilight series. People don't like to talk about that because who likes gothic romance with vampires? But Stephanie Meyer, I think because she studied with Stephen Walker at BYU, the Tolkien scholar, she understands alchemy. It's not an accident that those covers are all black, white, and red in those books. She has a soul triptych with, Jacob obviously is the body, Bella is the heart. What's the name of the other? Edward is the mind. He reads mind. They use those things. I think we'll probably forget Twilight, and some people will think that will be a very happy day when we've all forgotten Twilight. But it shows that that's now the reader's expectation for story. Is the kind of alchemical, layered, slow narrative release, lengthy story that so engages us, and we have such a cathartic experience imaginatively inside the story. If a story doesn't deliver on those counts, we're very disappointed. The Divergent trilogy was a magnificent series. I love Veronica Roth. She's a brilliant young writer, but the last book didn't deliver what Mockingjay did in Hunger Games, or what Deathly Hallows did in Harry Potter.
The other answer, of course, is to go backwards. You don't have to go to more recent books. So, there's lots of answers, but let's say Tolstoy, War and Peace, Anna Karenina, these are huge stories that you can get lost in. Middlemarch would be another great one. So if you want to they're not multi-volume, but there's like masses of stuff just in the one story.
My first, if we're going to go backwards, I would go with the Brothers Karamazov. I mean, to me, that's not only perhaps the greatest novel ever written, but I think Rowling draws the soul triptych out of those brothers and gives you it's a murder mystery. It's a genre novel. My technician here is telling me our hour is almost up.
Oh, okay.
I know it's very late in the UK, and there's one question that we were asked again and again and again. If you could ask J.K. Rowling one question, what would it be?
Oh, mine is very boring. I would just want to know everything she's ever read.
Bad answer, B. That's like she was asked what three books would you take to a desert island? And she said the complete Wodehouse, the complete Shakespeare, and the complete Austen. I was like, oh great. That's 50 bucks. That's not 3 bucks.
No, it's a great answer. Great answer. Profundity, story, humor, all together.
My answer to that question is never happening. That Rowling will never allow people like B. Groves or John Granger or Travis Brinsley or James Thomas at Pepperdine. The Potter pundits, Lana Whitehead at Fair. I mean, we're not going to get that chance to sit down with her and ask her pressing questions about that. I don't.
You're going to ask, though, aren't you? You're going to ask. So if it happens, we will let you know.
To me, I would ask about the alchemy sources. She said she read a lot about alchemy before she started writing the series, set the magical parameters of the work. We don't know. Is she talking about Carl Jung? Is she talking about Titus Burckhardt? Okay, and they're at war about what alchemy means. So that would be interesting. And maybe she just read literature. Maybe she got it from Dickens. I want to know where that came from. Then maybe a question that we were also asked. I was talking about this earlier. A lot of people wanted to know, how does she outline?
Yeah, it would be nice to know, wouldn't it? It would be nice to know.
We don't know. We've been given sort of a block thing from Order of the Phoenix, but I think we can be pretty sure that's misdirection. That doesn't answer the question. How does she fill out those boxes? How does she set the top, the axes of the chart? And we know that wasn't the final part of Order of the Phoenix, because Order of the Phoenix is a very complicated book if you actually chart it.
Yeah. And also some of those things, if you read it, they didn't happen. So this is not.
I think the sketch of the book. Is that how she actually outlines? We don't know. And maybe that's the question I would ask is, how did you organize these things? She said she spent months planning them, years planning the whole series, and then months planning each individual book. I probably would ask to see that process. We know it wasn't I diagrammed the things according to Mary Douglas turtleback thing. I think we can be absolutely certain that wasn't the way that she outlined the books. We can chart the effect, but we don't know how she got there. All right. Professor Groves, it's late where you are. I'm sorry to keep you up, but I'm going to respect your time and cut this off. For all of you that are out there, if you came in late, I know some of you came in late, and for all of you that are in replay land, I'm going to be sending a link to this out to everyone, the hundreds of people that are registered for the summer school program. So we'll be able to see this. God willing, there won't be this time delay on John and his speech in the replay. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the great questions that you sent in.
Thanks so much.
And thank you, Professor Groves, for your being here. You made all the difference. If it had just been
thanks for inviting me, John. And thanks for everyone who turned up and asked really great questions. It's been really enjoyable time chatting about it.
Thanks again. I'll see you tomorrow in the next class, and then on Sunday. So we've got 2 more classes in the summer school, and then we'll talk about the offering after that.
Bye.